This video is for any of my viewers. I'm directed toward Rick Debruhl, a question he asked of his viewers on his channel. Now it's easier for me to explain myself in one of my own videos than to comment on his video. I'll just let Rick Debruhl know that I've made this video for his as a response to his video. Now Rick Debruhl is automotive history. That's pretty much his channel. Now, I'd say about 90% of the videos that he's made have been from the Martin Auto Museum in Phoenix. He's done a couple of videos from different auto wrecking yards, maybe it's Desert Auto Salvage or something like that. You can search on Google Maps and that wrecking yard will come up. The one that I find more interesting is the one up toward Black Canyon City where they've got some of the older, maybe from, I don't know, 50s, 60s, some of the older cars. They've got some that are pretty much complete with a viable title that if you do want to, if you want a project vehicle, they've got some up there. If anybody's interested, I can get some more information and get it to you. Or if some chick wants to do a collab video with me, either at one of the auto salvage yards or from the Martin Museum, hey, let me know. I'd be all over that. We could do a bunch of videos if some other chick is into Sarah in Tune. She's down in Tucson. Her channel is automotive. If Sarah wanted to do a collab video with me to Martin Museum in Phoenix or one of the auto wrecking yards around town here, we could do it. Now I've seen one or two videos, from people have done from auto wrecking yards, and I've done one or two from auto wrecking yards. I've done one or two ghost videos from auto wrecking yards because that some cars wear out, some cars are in wrecks, and some cars, some people don't always leave a. I'm gonna get to that story, probably another video. But some of them are, the drivers and passengers don't always survive the accident. So you figure there might be a ghost or three hanging around the wrecking yard. But hopefully they've gone on to higher astroplanes and don't hang around the wrecking yard. But anyway, Rick Debruhl's latest video, the vehicle he's showing is like a 31, it's either Studebaker or Packard. It's one of the two. I think it was a Studebaker, but anyway, what Rick Debruhl is saying that was the first vehicle that had a car radio in it. And I've been thinking the car radios went back to the mid or late 20s, but I may be wrong on that because that's not really, the actual history of when they put the first one in there is not my field of expertise. I'm going to comment a little bit of the early technology they used for radios because that is something I do know a little bit about. But anyway, which vehicle was first, I'm not 100% sure. But Rick Debruhl was asking, what's your experience with a car radio? And I'm going to get to that in a couple of minutes. Now, let me get to the technology. Now, the early radios were all vacuum tube. The transistor didn't come out till the late 1940s, and it didn't really get into a lot of consumer stuff till probably the early 1950s. So, the transistor stuff, I don't think it got into car radios till probably the early 60s. You don't find car transistor radios in cars until the early 1960s. Now, like I said, the pre-transistor solid-state car radios were all vacuum tube. Now, the vacuum tubes required two different voltages on them. Besides the 6 or 12 volt that the vehicle would supply. Now they need a higher voltage for the plate circuits in the tubes. It's like 150 to maybe 300 volts, depending upon the vacuum tube. Now there's a couple ways that all radios would do that. Now the home radios, that come off the alternating current to line would just use a little power transformer in there, and then they could get higher voltages from that. Now there were some battery powered early radios, and not automotive radios. They would use a series of batteries. There would be one battery for the filaments for the tubes, maybe a volt and a half, 6 or 12 volts, something like that. And then there would be some what they call B plus batteries. They'd be from 60 volts to maybe 135 volts, something like that. For the plates on the tubes. Now the car radios, I know the old Motorola's had this. There's a big metal can that plugged in there. It's called a vibrator. It would It's like a relaxation oscillator. That's the electronic term for it. Would such a vibrate, and the contacts would generate the high, the high voltage for the, for the plate circuit for the tubes. This is probably going right over the head of most of my viewers. That's okay. You don't need to understand this. But there was 3 or 4 different technologies that that they used for the higher voltage for the for the plates. For the to make a vacuum tube works. Now there was one type of radio that the GM come out with that the tubes would actually work on 12 volts DC. They wouldn't need the real high voltage. But I understand those tubes were very super expensive just because of the way the tubes had to be constructed. Now, like I said, that's not something I know a lot about. I just know that they were out there. I just changed hands. That's the reason my phone moved. I usually balance my phone on my knee when I make these videos like this. But anyway, let's see. I think I covered technology. I remember my father had. I don't think it was a complete radio. I think it was only part of one. It was a very very early radio. It was a big metal box, maybe a foot square and maybe about 3 feet long. Had a couple cables coming out of it that would hook to some of the dashboard. Sit down under the dashboard somewhere. So this was a very very early system, and it's one that I was not allowed to tear apart, because they're very, very valuable antique. And where it's at today, I have no idea. Now, as I remember as a kid, maybe early 1960s to early 70s, um, was a lot of the old, not the automotive, but some of the home vacuum tube radios. I don't think I tear too many solid state stuff apart. But the old vacuum tube radios, I don't remember how many old vacuum tube radios I tore apart as a kid. And I think back now, what those radios would be worth. They'd be worth a small fortune if I had 2 or 3 of those old ones that I just unsoldered the resistors and capacitors and saved the vacuum tubes. Because the vacuum tubes were generally reusable. You could reuse them in other stuff. I tore apart lots of stuff like that. And if I just saved 1 or 2, they would be worth a small fortune right now. Now I do have 2 vacuum tube shortwave radios that one of them just appeared on my doorstep. I have no idea. I think a neighbor of mine just didn't want it, just left it there. And another one I found at a local scrap metal place. I got it for like $5. Now the tubes light up, but the radio doesn't work. And sometime I need to get through there and go through and figure out what's wrong with it. Probably replace a lot of the capacitors in there and restore them because working they're worth a small fortune. You can get $300-400 for those things off of eBay, any day. But they're sitting here. I'll have to will them if I don't do anything. I'll will them to my daughter and make sure my daughter knows what they are and that what even non-working, they're worth quite a bit. Those are 120-volt radios. Okay, let me get to my radio experience. Well, if you buy like a F-150, it's got that AM only Philco in there. Now, I bought a couple Ford pickups with that AM only Philco radio, and Philco was part of Ford, like Delco is part of General Motors, and Mopar is part of Chrysler. But anyway, when you bought that Ford pickup, that's the first thing you did was take that AM radio out and put you a nice FM radio in there. Back in the days that guys did that, FM radio was cool. That's before we had radios that would play, players that would play MP3 files and like that. That's pre-internet days. I'm talking about a few years ago. You got to have a few gray hairs to know what I'm talking about. But anyway, that's the first thing a guy would do when he bought a old vehicle that had an AM radio out of there. Of course, AM radio back in the day was cool, but a certain period of time, all the cool music shifted to FM, which I don't know. I think that even FM's probably all ads anymore because that's the last time I had an FM radio on. It was almost pure ads. But let me get to now. This is kind of a radio story. Now, I had this one pickup. This is back, I'd say probably mid 70s. Living Newton John's Let's Get Physical, but was popular back then. I had a pickup. I'd put a PA speaker on the roof. I had an 8-track player in there. Again, you got to have a few gray hairs to know what an 8-track player is. But anyway, I had Olivia Newton-John's "Let's Get Physical" on an 8-track tape, and I had the PA speaker wired to my radio and a couple of switches in there. Or if I wanted, I could switch from the internal speakers to my PA speaker on the roof, and I would go down the streets of Avondale here, playing "Let's Get Physical, Let's Get Physical, Let Me Hear Your Body Talk," and while I'm covering my radio, now the first, I think the first song the rock song I knew all the words to was Toto's "Rosanna." It's posted here on YouTube if you type up Toto Rosanna. The second song I knew all the words to was Pat Benatar's "Shadows of the Night." We're running with the shadows of the night, so baby, take my hand tonight. Surrender your dreams to me, for they'll come true in the end. Yeah, I can't sing worth anything, but I do know the words to "Shadows of the Night." And I saw Pat Benatar in concert. At the Compton Terrace. That was it's like a big grassy field over there. I don't think it's there anymore, but she come out there, and I saw REO Speedwagon out there too back in the early 1980s. But anyway, they had these big old massive speakers, probably about 10 feet tall. They come out and they said, "We've got 1,000,000 watts of audio out here," and because there was a big open field, they needed that audio to get everybody in the field. Anyway, that's my radio story, going down the streets of Avondale playing "Let's Get Physical, Physical, Let Me Hear Your Body Talk." Okay, if you want me to expand upon this, I think I've expanded on it as far as I can go, but maybe I can dig up one or two more things if somebody's super interested. Okay, and for Rick Debruhl, hey, stay cool, guy. Love your videos. Hey, I'd do a collab video with you from that Desert Auto yard up in Black Canyon City. Maybe we could dig up 2 or 3 more car enthusiasts to go through that yard. Maybe spend 2 or 3 days up there, get the entire yard, and make a 2-hour long YouTube video. That would be a world of fun. Cover as much as we can of that yard, because there's bound to be a few gearheads out there that just need that project car and don't know where to find it. Okay, ciao, vaya con Dios, auf Wiedersehen, sayonara.